Welcome to Habs Unfiltered, episode 255. I'm your host, Blaine Pudvang, and I'm joined now by a special guest, Marco D'Amico of Montreal Hockey Now. Welcome back to the show, Marco.
Thanks for having me back, bud.
Well, this is your first time back since you've made it to the big leagues, so we're happy that you could come back to little old us.
Yeah, I still kind of feel like I'm like Jesse Ullinen or like Laurent Dauphin or Ryan Poehling, where like I'm still kind of like that fourth line guy that could be sent down at any moment. So I appreciate the praise, but my goal is to stay in those leagues for a little while and kind of grow.
It's all about the hustle. You keep that hustle going. I mean, you're putting out content 3, 4, 5 times a day. So I know you're super busy, so I'm really happy you found some time to come on and talk a little bit about the draft. So
yeah.
I wanted to start it off first, though, with a discussion on development and analytics. So the Canadians hired this morning as we record, it's the 13th of May. They brought in Christopher Boucher as the head of analytics. How do you feel that that's going to impact overall on the development side?
There's many ways that you can use analytics to help development. It's used in many places for stride correction, because the way that they're tracking is not simply limited to, it's not just simply limited to statistical analysis. There's motion sensing that goes into it. There's strategy that goes into it, like where players tend to be on the ice versus where they need to be on the ice in general situations. It'll definitely help mentally, physically, and strategically in helping young players and existing players optimize their performances. And I feel like this is something that has been lacking for a long time, since basically analytics became kind of a thing. And, you know, it's fun to see that kind of shift, because it, as they said, Gorton and Hughes said during their Q&A, analytics has a bad name. You might as well just change the word to information. And would you really want to have less information just because you feel like that information renders some forms of, eye testing analysis less valuable? No, you take that and you add it to what you got and you make yourself a bigger conversation. It's not about supplanting one versus the other. It's about layering your analysis to throw in numbers, throw in the eye test, throw in gut feeling, mold that all together, and you go forward with a plan, be it player selection, be it pro scouting, be it amateur scouting, be it player development. Any way you want to look at it, at the end of the day, I feel like it's a necessary tool. And I mean, my first job, I work in marketing. If I didn't have analytics, I would not be able to function, right? You'd have no way to improve on your performances. So if it works for me, it could work in sports. And if it could work for a championship organization, then power to the Montreal Canadiens for getting that on the run.
Yeah, and I believe in the same press conference, Hughes and Gorton were talking about the importance of translating that information to the other departments and having the right voice for that. And Boucher, he worked with San Jose. He was one of the founding members of Sports Logic IQ. So I feel like they've got the right voice there. So that could really help, especially on the development side, when they're going through a rebuild like they are now. You know, it's important.
Mega important, because as we remembered in 2018, they announced, under the Bergevin era, they announced a reset. And, if analytics were used and a more open communication were given, how many more prospects in that time frame between 2018 and 2018 and 2021, I would say, how many prospects would have developed more optimally, say? And I think that's the thing you have to keep in mind. Like, would they perhaps have been more optimal in Victor Mete's development? Would they have been better in Jesperi Kotkaniemi's development? Would they have used a guy like Arturi Lehkonen in a top 6 setting, as opposed to just seeing him as an elite defensive player? And we can clearly see in the playoffs that those numbers are translating offensively for Colorado. So it brings extra information. And that's why development doesn't stop when you make the NHL. everybody likes to say the NHL is in a developmental league. They're right. It isn't. You need to get to the NHL, but you can still improve at the NHL level. And if you don't improve, that's when you're in trouble.
Well, I mean, you just look at Sidney Crosby, one of the hardest working players in the league. He's been called the world's best for years, but he never stops working at improving.
Correct. And I mean, geez, we can go even further back. Guy Lafleur, we interviewed Scotty Bowman on Montreal Hockey Now. And I remember him saying, Guy Lafleur used to show up an hour before practice, would shoot pucks, would beg the backup goalie, depending on who it was that year, to show up a little early, take shots, and to be really ready even before practice began. So dedication and talent go a long way. And if you're able to communicate and facilitate the way in which a player can improve with the addition of information that is communicated in a way that they get it. And this is why it's going to be important, because you have a guy like Martin St. Louis. Martin St. Louis is a great communicator. I sat in those press conferences listening to him, and it was like I was back in university listening to a professor, because it was concise, it was digestible, and every time he explained something, he took the time to think about it. Those are characteristics of a good communicator, and it's essential if you're going to build a team that is going to be consistently learning and improving itself.
Yeah, and he's also someone that has identified how to communicate to specific individuals, to break it down and provide that information to improve that one specific individual, instead of using a wide brush, using a cookie cutter plan like we had seen in the past.
Absolutely.
And now there's also an opportunity in the scouting department. Daniel Doré just stepped down from the New York Rangers. For those who don't know, he had been with Boston for, I believe, since 1998. And then he went to the Rangers in 06 or 07. He's been with Gorton basically for about
96 to 06, 07, and then 07, 08 till now with the Rangers.
Yeah. And he's been with Gorton for 20 some odd years. And he was a key figure in picking out a lot of players out of Quebec. Now he's possibly available, and he has that working relationship. So how big of an impact would that be to improve on the scouting side?
I think it's a necessary thing. I think that the Montreal Canadiens have the funds, the money, the will, the drive, and the need at this point to expand their scouting team. It doesn't make sense that they have 4 scouts for all of Canada. I'm sorry, it does not make sense.
No.
You are a top 3 franchise in the NHL, having a developed scouting staff that allows you to really kind of bring all that information together, because you're looking at over 600 kids. It's impossible to have 10 people do that. You need to flesh it out. And so you can have different layers of scouting. And this is where Daniel Doré can come in. He can come in and be the head of scouting, because he's been doing this for almost 30 years. It's going to be 27 years now. I think he deserves a shot at being a head scout. And I would, diminish a lot of the anxieties towards Nick Bobrov, he's probably going to be taking care of the European side, being the head guy over Martin Lapointe. And then you'd have basically Daniel Doré, and then Lapointe and Bobrov under him, and then a flurry of regional scouts below. And I think that that's interesting and necessary, because having a proper structure to your scouting team then allows for the proper trickle-down effect of information. In this case, it would trickle up, but you're able to really kind of get to the nitty-gritty, and those make for very interesting scouting sessions. And especially if you can regionalize it throughout the year, it makes it less convoluted when teams meet together, and which they do about 3 or 4 times a year before the draft, from January to about May in normal circumstances. This year, the draft's in July. So it really allows you to kind of, bring digested information to the table that you can kind of present in a way that's already been peer reviewed by everybody else. And you're kind of able to talk to other scouts about a player that they might not have ever seen. And then you're able to far easier in a way, you'd be able to produce a board that wouldn't necessarily be, I trust this guy's opinion over yours. It would be, here are the arguments, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. That's how Daniel Doré works. And if we remember, I believe it was in 2014 in the third round. I remember the video of him banging on the table in the Rangers draft board, and they ended up getting up and going to pick Anthony Duclair, who grew up right down the street from me in Laval. And, a lot of people were like, we're not sure he's ever going to make it. Boom, next season takes off. And then World Junior Championships and so on and so forth. And now he's really found his groove with the Florida Panthers. So being able to identify talent is a gift. Being able to communicate their pros and cons is another. And then being able to look at what's going on with them and say they need to work on this, and this to optimize their game. That's when you take it to the next level. And that's where Jeff Gorton is very strong, is that he can do all three. And I think that's where we're going to see the value of Jeff Gorton.
Yeah, he tends to be synergistic in his approach, where he puts everyone together in a room and lets it organically come together, where they share information and they all improve in some way based on working together. Whereas traditionally, these departments have been completely separated.
Absolutely. And I think this is the point. Departments in any situation need to talk to each other. Yeah. In any situation. And I think we have heard significant ties between analytics development. They're throwing in scouting, of course, because that kind of goes full circle, but you need to be a machine that churns in new players consistently. The Canadians had a massive hole between 2012 and 2017 where they weren't churning out a ton of young players. In fact, Arturi Lehkonen was the only consistent NHL player up until last year that was picked in that time frame. Now there's Jake Evans. So they have to get better in that, and especially with their first round picks. And I think that's going to be a major point. The Canadians have 4 first round picks over the next 2 years. And you can even factor in their second round pick this year, which is basically a late first as well. So you got to hit on those. If you're a retooling, rebuilding, whatever nomenclature you want to use, if you are not maximizing those picks, you are in the wrong business.
Yeah. They're definitely, it's a rebuild. It doesn't matter what they use.
Whatever you want to call it. Exactly.
Clearly. Yeah. Now, granted, Bergevin did a little favor before leaving, in that him and Timmins brought in a ton of new prospects, stockpiled a ton of picks. So the rebuild's not going to take quite as long as a traditional one would, but that doesn't mean it's not going to take, it's not going to happen overnight. So
no, and it's because they have pieces already, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a failed retool. I mean, let's call it a spade, right? So there's still the high end assets that they acquired during that retool that are still there. And this is what the time frame should have been back then, but they decided to go quickly because they still had Carey Price and Shea Weber in their playing days, and so it makes sense. But now you don't have a raise the sky kind of scenario where you have to trade everybody. You have Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Caden Gooley, Joshua Roy, Riley Kidney. Like, their prospect pool is already in the top half of the NHL. And now you're throwing in the first overall pick, another first round pick, an early second, and then more picks next year. I think that they have a head start on a full rebuild by about 2 years, I would say, because Caulfield and Gooley in back-to-back drafts are really good picks to get. So I don't think it'll take 5-6 years like everybody else thinks, because they don't have to deconstruct their roster to that degree. Do I think it's going to take time? Yes. I don't think they're going to be competitive next year. If you look at the division, this is no disrespect to the Montreal Canadiens, and Kent Hughes can obviously surprise us still, but the way the roster is shaping up and the way that their salary structure will limit any movement whatsoever, unless there's a fire sale of Montreal Canadiens players that we don't see coming. They're going to be probably around, I don't think they're going to finish dead last, but I don't see them being out of the bottom 10 is what I'm saying. When you have, the established top 4 of Boston, I think Bergeron is going back to Boston. I wouldn't worry about that. Those that think he's coming to Montreal, I don't think that's going to happen. So I think Boston's still going to be where they're going to be. I think the Leafs are going to be even hungrier if they're eliminated by the time this episode comes out. I think they're going to be even hungrier next year. I'm
Fingers
not
crossed.
allowed to show favoritism anymore, that it be even for the Canadians or against their rivals. So I'm just stating if they do lose, then they're going to be aggressive. And I don't think they're going to go backwards. I think they're going to trade someone to go forward. Tampa Bay is going to be Tampa Bay. They're not losing any core pieces next year. And the same thing can be said about Florida. I think they're going to lock up Huberdeau this summer. So how do you compete with that? You can't. Like, even if you could potentially compete with Boston for that last spot, no one's talking about Detroit, who is going to be a much better team next year. Simon Edvinsson is coming over as well. So another young stud defenseman. Ottawa is going to be better. They're going to be more aggressive this year than ever before in filling out that roster, and they have the cap space. So we'll see what they can do. And then Buffalo finished the year on fire. They were right next to the Montreal Canadiens for the longest point in the standings, and then shot up towards the last bit of the season. And if they're able to continue along that path, they can also make it very difficult for the Canadiens. So I don't see the Canadiens being able to compete with that, with the roster they have and the way that it's made up, especially with their issues in goaltending. And I just don't, if that's going to be the case, then you need to focus on development. You need to focus on scouting, and you need to, Kent Hughes has said it, it's going to take some time.
Now, I think everything you just said kind of points to why it's a good time to have the rebuild now, instead of trying to go into an arms race when you don't have the weapons to do so. Just reload, just sit back, reload, let them kill each other back and forth while you get healthy, while you get better. Just under St. Louis last season, St. Louis systems and concepts brought the team to about the midpoint of most statistical, offensive and defensively. So, if they're hovering around 18th in all those categories, then it's not out of the realm of possibility to say maybe they can finish 20th in the league, get a 10 to 12 pick, which better than this year. It's still competitive, but it's still going to give you a really good pick next year. And I think that's a really good, a good step forward.
I honestly think they'll still pick top 10 next year. I'm of that ilk. I think they'll take a step forward like we saw throughout the year. Like, we have seen teams have point per game players and still miss the playoffs by a large margin. I mean, we can just look at the early Pittsburgh Penguins and Washington Capitals that had 2 100-point rookies on their roster and still were second to last and third to last in the NHL that year. So it goes to show you that you can still develop elite young talent while still having holes in your team and finishing low. As long as they're hitting their stride as you're funneling more young players into the team, that's your recipe for success, because those original players are going to be off their entry-level contracts, as these young ones will bring in that value on their entry-level contracts. So you're consistently rotating value, and that is the key in the salary cap era, is to rotate that value. Teams that do best, you look at Tampa Bay, for example, they did best because they had key players on contracts that were either entry-level or bridged. You look at Kucherov, you look at Sergachev, you look at Point, those were bridged contracts. Right now, if you're looking at Colorado's getting great value from guys like Bowen Byram, Cale Makar. Not anymore. It's still great value, but I'm just saying it's not, an entry-level contract.
Yeah.
And then Bowen Byram is going to provide them a great value for the next 2 years as well. So that when those players are able to come in and do as well as they have, and I want to remember one more guy, Seth Jarvis for the Carolina Hurricanes has been great value for them in the playoffs. Again, entry-level contract. So when you have an established core, you're able to just funnel these guys in. That's when you have sustained winning. And I think that's what Kent Hughes wants to do.
Yeah. And I'm going to date myself here by saying this, but I remember when Joe Sakic started in the NHL as a Nordique, when he stepped in, he was having 100-point seasons, and the Nordiques were at the dead last. They're at the bottom of the standings. And eventually, once they moved and got a goalie, they started winning cups. And that's exactly what you were pointing at. You got to get your best players to reach their peaks at the time when you have the most support for them. And it looks to be the plan for Hughes.
I think so. Honestly, and I'm not tooting my own horn, I swear. Okay. When it comes to this, body language for me is everything. And seeing a general manager on TV versus like seeing him live, you see body language a little bit more and you pay attention to the subtleties. At his end of season press conference, Kent Hughes looked like an individual that was ready to partake in patience. He was an individual whose main goal was to gain some liquidity in his salary cap structure and focus on his youth. And, you know, he spent a lot of time going over the players that impressed him that are young and coming up. And it wasn't about being a competitive team next year. It was about building a process and a culture that would allow for consistent winning that we see from a lot of the big teams in this league. And I think that in the past, we've seen a lot of general managers take shortcuts. You know, this isn't a sole jab at Marc Bergevin. As much as I respect the man greatly, the Bob Gainey and Pierre Gauthier combo in 2009, 2010, granted, that team went to the Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Finals, but they rebuilt through free agency, which at the end of the day came back to bite them because the one trade they made was Scott Gomez, and that was terrible to begin with, and they had to buy it out. Thankfully, there was back then a compliance buyout, so you were allowed to buy him out without it being a problem. But again, it goes to show you constantly cutting corners. The Canadiens have never truly rebuilt as a franchise. Never. There was a period in time where it looked like that in the early 2000s where they had multiple first-round picks in back-to-back drafts. And those players allowed them to be a good team in 07, 08, 09. Remember those in 08, especially when they, again, went to the Eastern Conference Finals? Or no, I believe the second round. I apologize.
Yeah, they beat Boston that year.
They beat Boston but lost to Philly. I remember it was on my birthday. And so what ended up happening is that it was consistently cutting corners because they had good core pieces. They couldn't necessarily be bad, but they weren't good at going and being patient and going to get the right pieces. They kept forcing it. So we had situations where like the Canadiens gave up a first round pick for 1 year of Alex Tanguay.
Yeah, basically 60 some odd games of Alex Tanguay.
It was basically a rental. And this consistently happened. Bergevin was guilty of the exact same thing. And it's situations like that frustrate you because, you know, Bergevin, for example, had a great core of Pacioretty, Subban, and Price. All he needed to do was get a number one center. And he thought he had it in Galchenyuk because he had the third overall pick, and that's respectable and that's fine. But your job is to go and get another one while he's waiting. This is the benefit that the Canadiens have now, say with their first pick, if they decide to select a guy like Shane Wright, because the Canadiens are weak at center. They're going to be a weak team. But at least they have the top guy already for now in Nick Suzuki. Nick Suzuki was basically a man on his own for 3 months in the NHL. He was the unquestionable number one center. The guy right behind him was Laurent Dauphin or Jake Evans for the longest time while Dvorak was out. So by having, you know, a Suzuki, a Dvorak kind of handle, you know, the top end, you can kind of ease in a guy like Shane Wright. And I think if the Canadiens are able to if they see fit to select him, then that would be a change in pace from what we've seen them do with prospects before, which is rush them and put them in a situation they're not ready for.
So that does bring me to the 2022 draft. You mentioned Shane Wright. Now, there's some that are of the mind of comparing this draft to next year's draft, you know, saying it's weak because you don't have the generational talent like Bedard next year, who's a special player, but you know, we need to tank so we can get that, but there's no guarantees you win another lottery. Yeah.
Just do both.
Yeah. Do both.
Tank next year and just pick the best player available this year. Who cares?
Exactly. So you can't guarantee you're going to get Bedard next year. So you got the lottery win now. You have this, you know what you have. So the decision now comes down to Shane Wright or someone else. Now I know, Simon Boisvert over on 91.9 was talking about Connor Geekie, but I think he says that more to kind of get the ball rolling in the discussions.
No, I was on that segment actually. So we went back and forth, and what I respect about Simon's way of looking at it is when he's not sure, then if he doesn't have a consensus, he'll just like open up the game and all the outside noise is out, and he just looks at what he likes.
Yeah.
And yeah, he looks at Geeky's size because he's like, well, when this guy matures, and he's optimistic that Geeky is going to fix his explosivity. If that's the case, and he is able to fix his explosivity, then yeah, I think he could be a number one center. But I still don't think he'd be as effective as Shane Wright. And so the reason for that is because I doubt that he's going to fix that explosivity to the point where it's anything more than NHL average, which won't make him a bad player. He's a guaranteed top 6 center for me, like 100%. In any other situation, if Montreal are picking 10th, I would be thrilled if I saw them pick. Like, I would tell Canadiens fans to be extremely happy because that is a good hockey player. I have no problem.
Oh, yeah.
But it's because a lot of individuals tend to lean on size, right? They're afraid of the smaller players. And that, again, I've always said this, a player has never fallen because they were too big and you regretted it. Never, right? A player has always gone up and was drafted because of his size, and there was regret. We can all think of Logan Brown.
Hugh Jackman.
Pardon me?
Hugh Jackman. Or Hugh Jessamine, sorry.
Hugh Jackman would be my first overall pick.
Well, I mean, he's a Wolverine, but
yeah, first overall.
The Hugh Jessamine pick, that's another pick.
I mean, we can keep
huge
it Canadians. You look at Michael McCarron was picked because of his size. And a lot of my issues, Cole Caulfield falling because of size concerns. And the more you look at it, Kirby Dach going 3rd overall maybe was a mistake because they probably should have gone for the smaller, frail center in Trevor Zegras, who's more spectacular. And so this is why you kind of have to play the role a bit. A lot of it also has to do with the development of the player once the player is drafted. And I think that's what a lot of people are ignoring. So when I look at Shane Wright, I'm not looking at a 17-year-old in my mind. I'm looking at a 16-year-old. I'm looking at a player that lost 18 months of his development. And a lot of scouts will just be like, after 2-3 months, he should be able to pick it up. And he did. No, I'm sorry. Shane Wright had a 1.2 points per game in junior with Kingston from the start of the season till the World Junior Championships. And when he came back from the World Junior Championships, he had a 1.6 point per game. That's an 105 point pace in the OHL. If he had 105 points, ain't nobody questioning him going first overall right now. But it's because numbers and offensive production, and because he's not a spectacular player. And
that's exactly
spectacular players at first overall. And you know what? Leon Draisaitl was not a spectacular player at all at that age. He was, a big center playing in the WHL that was really raw and needed development. I think Shane Wright is like that. I think Shane Wright now may disappoint you, but I think in 2-3 years from now, when he's caught up to the rest of his class, because this isn't a Shane Wright problem, this is an OHL problem. And this is the thing. Like, I've spoken to a lot of OHL players. Delbel Belouz that plays for the Mississauga Steelheads, Owen Beck, same concept. Ty Nelson that plays against Shane Wright right now for the North Bay Battalion. Even Pavel Mintyukov, who is now just joining the OHL. Listening to their different experiences, Mintyukov missed an entire season, could have gone back to Russia, and stayed here and trained anyway. All those kids missed a year. Listening to their experience in the first 4 months of the season versus how it's picking up now, you see the difference. You see the distinction. And I always think back and I go, Shane Wright was a dynamite player at the age of 17 in a U18 tournament last summer. Do people honestly think there's going to be that pronounced of a drop off?
Yeah.
No. I think that his coach uses him poorly. I think, no offense to Luka Caputi, but there's no top end defenseman on that team. It's not a very good team. He's not playing on a dynamite Frontenac's team. Yeah, there's good offensive players, but they tend to disappear in the playoffs. And he's doing well points-wise in the playoffs, but he's just not eye-catching as people would like. And I think that's the difference. When you see a guy like Juraj Slavkovsky, he's eye-catching because he's massive and he moves quickly. And I like that. And there's nothing that there's nothing I dislike about the player. He's in my top 3, and so is Logan Cooley. there are aspects of their games that they are able to do where we watch them that wouldn't be translatable to the NHL. And I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at a guy like Juraj Slavkovsky, he's great. He's going to be a solid top 6 power forward, if not top line power forward. He's got the speed, he's got the skills, he's got the shot. Obviously, defense is something that every young player is going to have to work on. But my issue is, and this is what I like to call it, the Rantanen Puljujärvi spectrum. Because when you come out of the Finnish Liga, you're 6'4", you're massive, you're already physically built. He's 228 pounds. You can't be that much more and play the game he wants to play at the NHL. So he's close to physical maturity already. Yeah. So there's not much physical growth that can come from that. So when you start playing against teams whose defensemen are the same size as you and are as physical, if not more physical than you, will he be as effective? Will he be able to play as effective in tight against players that are used to playing in tight spaces? This is what you need to look at. Whereas Shane Wright, we know he can already do that. He's been doing that for a very, very, very long time. Cooley has the same problem. Cooley, a lot of what his coach used to tell me was, he's got to work in getting to the high danger areas more often because he tends to play on the perimeter. But when he goes to the high danger areas, he's super creative and he'll deke your jockstrap is in the stands because he dekes you right out. So there are flaws in every single one of these players. No player is perfect unless they're generational. And you see it with a guy like Connor McDavid at the time, Sidney Crosby, and potentially Connor Bedard. He looks great. So to me, I don't think it takes away from the player. It just forces scouts to have to diversify the way they think and evaluate a youngster. And they've never been put in a situation, except for the last 2 years, where development wasn't on the same playing field, prospect per prospect. And I think that's the key. Yeah.
There's a lot of, some guys played 20 games, some guys played 80 games, some guys played no games last year. And now with Shane Wright, I feel like his main attribute is his hockey IQ, which could really help translate to the pro game because he already plays that pro style system. He's already, he's already got the NHL size.
I think he'd be more effective.
He would be more effective, yeah.
Because in junior, there's not much structure to their game.
Or support.
Yeah. Puck support is key, right? And this is the thing. And if you watch a lot of the Kingston Frontenac's games, like there's very little puck support. They're very much like to their own. And the amount of plays he makes that goes to die on their sticks a lot of the time, you feel terrible. But because it's a team full of shooters, he's a pass first guy in that roster right now, which has brought on a ton of criticism because they're like, well, he scored 39 goals at 15. Shouldn't he be scoring like 50 at the age of 17? Well, no, because they're using him differently.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not a team that's predicated on full octane offense like Kingston was in 2019, 2020. It's no longer that.
And
I think that if you put him in an NHL setting with NHL players like wingers that can pass and shoot, like really diversify the way the utilization works, I think you'll see the player that many were expecting.
Yeah, a lot of players tend to do better when they're playing with better players. And he seems to be that kind of guy. He has that kind of skill set. And I know a lot of the, as you mentioned, a lot of the naysayers are talking about his offensive production. He only finished 8th in the OHL in scoring. But if you look at who finished ahead of him, he is the only draft eligible player. Everybody else is older.
Oh yeah.
So
and there was a time where Luca Del Bel Beluz had like a good 20-point advantage over him, and he caught up.
Yeah.
And again, like there are few top number one overall picks. Like Connor Bedard, for example, is great. I'm never going to knock him. Does Connor Bedard play on the penalty kill? Not often.
No. Does
Connor Bedard go up against the top lines of the opposition? No, he goes against their shutdown lines. Shane Wright is used so differently than the way that actual top-end generational talents were ever used in the CHL. And I think that's my problem, is he's not being deployed as the offensive menace that he is. He's being asked to play a role that doesn't necessarily suit his style. When I think of Shane Wright, I think of his under 18s last May. where he just comes in and is one of the best players. Like him, and it was the Connor Bedard and Shane Wright show basically last summer. Yeah. And that's what I remember. And that's what I'm going to see. Yes, he struggled in the OHL, but his team was like, without Shane Wright on that team, I'm not sure they would have made the playoffs. I'm going to be completely honest.
Probably not.
No, I don't think that they have as many 30 goal scorers on their team if it's not for Shane Wright on that team, taking on the attention and being double shifted or double covered basically every shift. He's got a spotlight on him and he's going to improve because of it. Do I think that there's that much of a difference between him, Cooley, and Slafkovsky? No. And this is where I want to bring it to. I do not want to say or put Shane Wright on a pedestal. I just want to point out that this is a very good top three. This is a top three that any team picking in the top three, Montreal, New Jersey, Arizona should be very excited about because there are options. These are going to be three really good players. And I feel like, you don't need to prop one over the other to value them. I think that they're equally as valuable together. And you're really picking at straws at this point because I think all three of them are going to have a great NHL career. I think
you're just looking for who's going to have the larger impact for your team.
Exactly. And I think this, when you listen to Ken Hughes talk about culture shifts and bringing in winners, I think we see where he's going with this. I think the Canadians very much like Shane Wright, and the only reason they're in Helsinki right now, in my opinion, is to do due diligence in seeing Slafkovsky live. And that is not to say that, doing your due diligence is a negative thing. Quite the opposite. Juraj Slafkovsky came from being a potential top 10 pick to being a consensus number 2, fighting for number 1 when no one thought that was ever going to be a question. So that takes a great amount of performance and skill. The only thing that will keep me kind of concerned with him is going to be the long-term production. Because yes, he did well in the Olympics, but he wasn't anywhere near as effective in the Finnish Liga. It wasn't, if you compare the offensive output or the creativity to guys like Capocacco, who have the record for under 18 scoring in that league, or Kakanyemi, or Marco Granlund, or Patrick Laine, he's woefully under them offensively. The main reason why he's at number 2 is because he had a killer Olympics. And again, today,
it did help.
And he had a really good World Championship game against France today. He was the most used player for Slovakia, which is fine. And like I said, that's a non-pressure situation. I think teams are going to want to see him in an elimination setting. They're going to want to see him in a quarterfinal, a final, see what happens, because, playing France is fine and dandy, but I think they want to see him versus NHL caliber talent. That's when you're going to know. And there's still a chance that Slafkovsky winds up being the first overall pick. If he really wows and shows that he's got another gear on top of where he's going, then there's a chance. And you know what? Yeah. It's totally okay. If the Canadians are going to play the long game, you take the best player available, and that's totally okay.
And my expectation is going to be Shane Wright. I don't expect Slafkovsky to be the guy.
I think so too.
Having Hughes and them go over to Europe to watch the World Championships could be due diligence, as you said, but it could also be for them to take a look at other players who they may be willing to trade up for. They have the assets. They could possibly trade up to go for any one of these players that are over there playing now. And on Shane Wright, I know it's a long shot. It's possible.
They'd have to trade a heck of a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, if you go up 5-6 spots, it's not that big of a stretch. If you want to get into the top 5, yeah, huge stretch. But on Shane Wright, just if anyone believes in fate or they believe in, some kind of destiny, Shane Wright plays for the Frontenacs wearing number 51. It's been 51 years since Lafleur was selected first overall. And the draft lottery was won on the 10th of May, which is Lafleur's number retired in the rafters. So I don't know. I think the ghosts are telling us something.
Look, I'll be pretty straightforward on this. I would be shocked if it wasn't Shane Wright. I would be shocked. And I understand that there's going to be debate. And that's totally okay, because this happens once every, 40 years. So if you want to make sure you get a cornerstone franchise player, you want to make sure you get one. And, I could understand the anxiety, but a lot of the people that are speaking ill of Shane Wright in a very aggressive way, they're not willing to put their name on that. And there's a reason for that, because you could feel a certain way right now, but there is a serious potential of backfire with Shane Wright, because the elite talent has always been there. His shot is already NHL level. Like, he could probably pot 20. It's just, at the end of the day, you don't see what you want to see, but you might end up seeing it down the road. And that, if you look at, and I always say this, if you look at other first overall picks, Nate McKinnon, a lot of people were nervous about Nate McKinnon in his second, third year, fourth year, because he hadn't taken off. The signs were there. He was looking good, but it just wasn't happening. And then he took off. Leon Draisaitl, a little worried the first couple of years. Then he took off. And especially with this management team, the way that they're optimally developing their players and communicating them, I have more faith watching them and seeing them, do well than I did in the past. And I think that they're more equipped to handle a player like Shane Wright, who hasn't played, and they're going to make the best decision for his development. And then you're going to be able to go from there.
Now, you made a good point on Twitter recently about comparing draft classes. You use the 2014 draft as the comparison to this year's draft, where people were saying, you're not going to get a lot of really good players in this draft. I'm kind of unsure. And you look back at 2014 and you put out a list of names that anyone would jump on right now if they could add them on their team.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of players in this draft that I don't buy the fact this is a weak draft. I really I don't. I'm sorry. There's a lot of depth to this draft. I think the strength of this draft is not the top end. It's the 20 to 45 range. I think that a lot of people are sleeping on a lot of guys, and to the benefit of teams that have multiple picks in the late first and early second. I think Montreal is one of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely going to be fun, because I got to tell you, and I can tell, this is how I know. There are some drafts where I get to do a top 32, and I get to, it's the first draft I do a top 30, or second draft I do a top 32. So not many times, but you do a draft ranking in the first round, and sometimes you reach the end and you're like, oh man, I got to think of who I would put at 29 or 30. Oh man, because I don't really feel like this player should be there, but might as well, because I need a 32nd player, a 31st player. I fought with myself with 10 players for the last 2 spots. That, just to show you. And this was before the U18s. Just to give you an idea, this was in January.
Yeah.
So I was fighting with myself then. The one I just did on Montreal Hockey Now, if I had hair, I would have pulled it out, because there is a lot of talent. And I feel like
I found it. That's right.
Yeah, no, I tried here, but then I had to shave some. Here we go. It ended up just making it more intriguing, because it warranted maybe more of a top 64 approach, where you go more in depth and you look at what those early picks are. And I've always said it. I've always said it. The most valuable pick in the draft, outside of first overall, obviously, we're not going to go there, but the highest value pick, in my opinion, is the first pick of the second round.
Which brings me to a point that I wanted to bring up. The Canadians hold it. And I was looking at some players, they'll pick up anyone who slides, but there's one name in particular that I want to know if you think that they should really take a chance on him. And that's Ivan Miroshnichenko.
Instantly.
I realize he's got Hodgkin's lymphoma. He's going to miss the year, but the skill, oh my God, the skill's top 10 skill.
I wouldn't even be surprised if he were gone before Calgary's first round pick. If NHL teams, and I'm knocking on wood, because the last thing, I just, kids and cancer, I can't do. The last thing I want is to get bad news. If NHL teams get encouraging news on his situation, he will go in my opinion, in the first round, easy. And I hope it for him. If it's not Montreal, I wish that kid the best, man. That is such a terrible thing to go through at that age.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if he's available at any point after Montreal speaks first, I would jump on that if I were the Montreal Canadiens, because the talent is there. I consistently had him in that top 10 conversation until the news came out. And then I even put a nota bene at the end of my ranking saying I would have ranked him, but I don't know where he's at. And so I know the team's got a little bit of information while they were in Germany, because I know he's doing treatment in Germany. And I hope, goddamn, I just hope the best for the kid. And I hope he's a first round pick, because he deserves it. He should have been unquestionably, one of the top picks of this draft. So I hope for it. He'd be a great target.
Yeah, skill-wise, absolutely. The cancer clearly is going to drop him, and he's got the most curable form. So that's the good news there, and they got it early. So
yeah, no, I'm really thankful.
That's amazing news.
I just can't imagine going through that as a kid with your family. And I will say this: and I will say when and not if here, because I'm really rooting. But when he does come back from that, what adversity that would say, what character does it take to go through that? And I think that would be more impressive to me than being the MVP in a midget tournament. I'm sorry. To me, that speaks so much volume. And if he is good to go and he's working on returning, then you trust that, you go with that, and you reward that. Yeah,
and with the Russian factor as well this year, due to the Ukrainian situation, it might drop him a little bit. That's why I'm thinking 33, 32.
Yeah, you could see late first round. I've spoken to a lot of individuals within the market that have said late first round. Like for the top ones, late first round is what they're expecting because of that Russian factor. Danila Yurov, Gleb Chikazov, and Ivan Miroshnichenko in a normal situation would have all gone in the first round.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's that big of a stretch for teams to make those picks, because if you're picking a player over there now, you're going to hold his rights indefinitely. So you can wait out this situation.
Absolutely.
If a team has the patience for it, they can do it. And as you said, Hughes is showing that he has patience. So if that's those are the best players, that's where he's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I don't think that, even if you look at a guy like Jeff Gordon, he's never really been afraid to go and pick up Russians in his time. Like Kravtsov was considered a reach, in 2018. He was not afraid to make that pick. So I'm really not afraid. I think that they'll be just fine. And they can pick up a guy like Danilo Yurov or Ivan Miroshnichenko or Chikazov, in the late first round or even early second, then fantastic. That would make it one of the most valuable drafts ever for the Montreal Canadiens.
Absolutely. And I want to say now, thank you again for coming on the show. You're always welcome here. We pride ourselves on being inclusive with everyone in our hockey community. And we love these passionate discussions that we can have, especially when our guests can bring that passion with them. And you definitely do. So why don't you tell my listeners where they can find your work and where they can find you?
So I'm the beat writer for Montreal Hockey Now, so montrealhockeynow.com. If not, I'm pretty active, more than I should be, I think, at times, on Twitter, MN D'Amico. You can find me there. And on Sundays, if you're in the Montreal area, I'm on TSN 690 at 8 a.m. And then sporadically on French radio 91.9 in Montreal.
Again, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I really do appreciate this. And, thank you. And for my listeners, remember, if you're talking about it, so are we.